Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second session of the fourth Young Researchers Workshop on Terrorism and Belligerency, where we talk about human enhancement and advanced technologies this year. This is, of course, the second session. You can see the recordings of the first session on our YouTube channel. And this session is also live stream on Facebook and recorded for the purpose of our YouTube channel. In this session, we're going to have two presentations. Both of them are very interested. Both of them are going to take about 90 minutes, a bit longer than that. Each presentation is going to take by a different early career researcher or young researcher. And it's going to take approximately 20 to 30 minutes, followed by a respondent, a designated respondent who will address that article and that presentation. And following that, we're going to have an open discussion with Q&A. So if you're on the audience and you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A. For our panel members, please use the raise hand feature if you have a question, and we'll give you the floor after the respondents reply. Okay, I think we can actually start. So let me introduce the first speaker, and let me do it properly. Yeah. So Kaja Kowalczewska. Kaja Kowalczewska is an attorney at law, and Dr. Kaja Kowalczewska is an attorney at law and lecturer at the universities in Krakow, interested in disruptive military technologies and their ethical and legal ramifications. Her doctoral dissertation on lethal autonomous weapon systems. Kaja will talk about her paper titled, "Is there a duty to protect the right of life of state-owned soldiers by preempting fear and anxiety through the cognitive enhancement?" To the respondent for Kaja's presentation is Dr. Bohrer, who is a senior lecturer at the Ilan University Faculty of Law. His main research field are public international law, with an emphasis on research both current and historical issues relating to international humanitarian law and international criminal law. Zev has published a lot. Let's give it by that to make it a bit shorter. And is a big friend of the workshop and the Minerva Center, and we've had him basically on each and every one of the workshop sessions throughout. So he's one of the biggest supporters of this workshop, and we are happy to have him again in this presentation. Kaja, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I will just share the presentation. It works. I can see, you can see the presentation. So thank you for this kind introduction and giving the title of my paper. I have to make a first disclaimer. I made it a bit controversial and complicated, but in fact the whole paper is rather a simple one. And I wanted to start with the, okay, it works. Why I tried to tackle that problem, because I had that research questions that came to my mind. First one is, are states obliged to prevent diseases and mental disorders that are resulting from soldiers' work service, and which the one that are caused by participation in hostilities in combat. And of course, in this context, what is the actual level of hardship that is inherent to military life? So how much soldiers can stand legally, and assuming that those cognitive enhancement technologies, which I call it in a shortcut here, are assuming that they boost compliance with law and can have beneficial effects on health of soldiers, then whether states are maybe obliged to use those technologies, human enhancement technologies, which I find as a bigger group of technologies than just cognitive enhancement, as safeguards to life and health of soldiers. So then, can those technologies and experimentations be imposed on soldiers? And what are actually the challenges to maintain the highest standards of biomedical, bioethical research, especially in the context of characteristic of those research subjects, which are soldiers. So I planned to discuss those questions in my paper, which is divided in two big parts. First one is more factual, less legal one, where I try to describe cognitive enhancements of soldiers, what are their aims, objectives, risks, benefits. And then also I'm drawing on some examples from history when something went wrong and we should avoid the same mistakes. And the second part is much more legal, where I'm trying to find some provisions from international law and especially human rights law that relate to the protective regimes of soldiers, of state-owned soldiers. And then I'm relating to law of armed conflict, international, universal, and European human rights protection regimes. And also I'm drawing on some basic assumptions of biomedicine research and related law. So first of all, I'm trying to give my definition of cognitive enhancement, and this is probably some part of my paper that would be adjusted if I get some nice comments from people who are not lawyers and who are dealing with this kind of research. So I'm treating cognitive enhancement as any intervention in the brain that boosts, augments, make it better, memory, attention, perception, understanding, concentration, information processing, decision-making beyond normal healthy function. And it can be a technology that is only aimed at one of those skills or at all of them. It doesn't matter from the point of view of legal analysis. And it can be a pharmaceutical intervention with a drug or a transcranial, more technical stimulation like Neuralink promoted by Elon Musk. Of course, my research is based on the assumption that those kind of experimentations are carried out, especially by advanced military agencies like DARPA, but often or almost always research of results of that kind of research is not publicly available. It's directed more on the military units that are paying for that, and it's treated as secret information, and therefore it's not very easy to analyze a specific technology. So I'm not doing that in my paper. As I said, from my perspective, from legal analysis, it's not essential. So it's also argued, not by me, but by authors, that soldiers' cognitive skills are seriously endangered and degraded by stress incurred during combat hostilities. Therefore, I'm arguing that this cognitive enhancement can be a part of a typical training exercise equipment, set of tasks performed by state that is aimed at improving military skills, capabilities. Because in fact, soldiers are the weakest part, but also the essential part of every military potential until now and in a foreseeable future. So soldiers are usually referred to as a platform of skills, an asset to the military, a weapon, and also as a human being. And I find this last perspective the most important for my research, because those human beings will come back to their families after service and will have to live with the experience. And usually it's the retirement is much earlier than in other types of jobs. So they still have a whole life to live with all the consequences. But at the same time, it's not only an individual problem, it's also a state problem, because the state will have to bear financial and political responsibility for those veterans and their families. And it depends on typical national regulation, but usually it will be some kind of compensation scheme, pensions, social benefits, etc. So it's kind of a burden. So bringing out the full potential of soldiers by enhancing them must go hand in hand with the fact that those soldiers also have to be protected to avoid those negative consequences in the future. So another section, I'm so sorry, of the first part of my paper relates to this kind of interesting, but I found it very hard to really find a proper literature papers and articles on those topics, so all recommendations are welcome. Emotions, war, and mental disorders, especially emotions and war. Charles Hodge submits, first of all, that recent conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq place a serious psychological burden on soldiers and their families, and those kind of burdens, mental disorders, can take form of PTSD, depression, substance abuse, traumatic brain injury, or still high suicide rate. So those are the problems that follow the participation in hostilities from the side of soldiers. According to him, it is caused especially by increasing asymmetry of conflicts and irregular methods of fighting, new types of terrorism, methods of combat. And paradoxically, those modern veterans of modern wars are much more affected by those serious mental disorders than veterans of wars that took place 100 years ago, despite the fact that recent wars are much more remote, and the army is much more technologically advanced. So the typical, let's say, chain of logic here is that during the war we have this experience of distress and hardship, which translates into traumatic event, a trauma, which then may cause, for example, a PTSD or any other disorder. And at the same time, war is a cocktail of emotions, not only the so-called bad one, but also the good one, the excitement, strong bond of brotherhood, self-sacrifice, sense of purpose. Those are the actually emotions and motivations that were proved by science, by articles that led people to the military service. But also, on the other hand, anger, revenge, and fear for one's life, but even more, fear for letting your comrades, your brothers in arms down. So this is really a huge cocktail of emotions, and those emotions have some relation with low armed conflict. First of all, they were the building blocks of this regime. As we recall, emotions like empathy, mercy, sorrow led to the development of the international humanitarian law or law of armed conflict. But at the same time, its very content, its provisions, require soldiers to shut off some of those emotions, like anger, revenge, disgust, in order to respect human dignity. Nevertheless, at the same time, those emotions are very inherent to human nature, as we know. And just on margin, I would like to point to the discussion on exactly lethal autonomous weapon systems, where it was argued that maybe those kind of weapons, the artificial intelligence that has no emotions, may actually contribute to higher level of compliance with law of armed conflict on the part of states than if states were still using regular human soldiers. So what is the place for human enhancement and cognitive enhancement technologies in this cocktail of emotions? Exactly the same as with the weaponized AI. And what is more, the recent study of ICRC showed that the privation of sleep and food over a period of time and under distress, duress, hardships of warfare had a direct impact on unethical and unlawful behavior of soldiers. So this can lead us to this argument that maybe the cognitive enhancement technologies can be another law compliance booster apart from traditional enhancements like training, education, etc. Okay, so here I will just shortly relate to those two historical cases. First one is the doctor's trial and Nazi experimentation that we all know about. And here I will just make two short conclusions that at least some of those experimentations could have contributed to the strengthening of public health and they could bring benefits to the science and society if we distract it from the if we distract from those experiments the ideology that stood behind, etc. And in fact, what distinguishes those experiments from the experiments that we have on humans now is the procedural standards that evolved after Second World War and now are the basic principles of conducting human experimentation. Interestingly, the second example is post Second World War I, and it's a series of experiments on soldiers, not only on soldiers, led in the USA, and they involved mustard gas testing. US government thought that maybe people with different color of skin are less sensible for mustard gas. There was a wide experimentation when it comes to the nuclear weapons radiation. And of course, something that probably everyone heard about, psychotropic drugs and their use as a truth serum. And what is more, let's say, post-Second World War history of human experimentation can be completed with something called Gulf War illness, when all soldiers sent to Gulf War were administered with substances. I don't remember the proper name of them. They are in my paper and they are complicated. Because the government feared the use of chemical weapons. And now, 30 years later, it is being observed that those soldiers who were deployed and who were administered those drugs, they have the common health problems, which are in general called the Gulf War illness. And they may be a result of this human experimentation that was taking place then. Interestingly, as I said, what distinguishes Nazi experimentation from something that we can approve and accept now, those American soldiers were not aware of the fact that they were subjects of research. It was a secret procedure. It came to the public opinion and information in 90s. So there was no informed consent and no compensation scheme for those soldiers. So there are many cases probably that are still not available to us and are not transparent and still remain secret. So I can guess it's not just a theoretical problem, but it's a practical one as well. So every time when we test something, there is this risk of negative consequences. There is a list of unknowns, and I just want to point out some unknowns linked with cognitive enhancement. From medical side, it is still unknown what are the long-term consequences of brain stimulation. It may lead to a permanent impairment. Also, the scientists are not sure whether enhancing one part of our brain, let's say attention skill, wouldn't damage the other part of our brain and we will become somehow disabled in that area. Apart from medical considerations, there is also an issue of army units cohesion and dynamics, how it's going to impact the army structure when one unit is enhanced and the other is not. Also, it has a more vague ethical and legal consequences. What it's gonna do with the value of democratic society and dignity of human beings, thus human rights obligations and regime, how it's gonna change our common understanding of humans. Okay, so now I'm coming back to the legal perspective. First of all, law of armed conflict, not much about protecting state-owned soldiers. Of course, we can find common articles of Geneva Conventions which prohibit medical and scientific experiments and treat them as grave breaches. This is, of course, the legacy of the Nazi experimentation, but they don't relate to state-owned soldiers because, in fact, law of armed conflict protects only those lives of those who are not or no longer engaged in hostilities. At the same time, it's highly unlikely that the state would sacrifice on purpose or kill his own soldier. And this relates to the previous list of assets that a soldier brings to a state. Of course, at the same time, soldiers are much more prone to die or to be killed as a result of negligence or recklessness of state, of his her comrades, or of his own recklessness. And this is bringing us closer to the issue of medical experimentation and negligence. I also devoted some part of my paper to special characteristics of military life, which this term is used by a recommendation by Council of Ministers of Council of Europe in the recommendation on human rights of soldiers. And of course, this term of special characteristics of military work service is very important in this paper, because we have to think what can we do to a soldier, how much state can invest in a soldier, what he can do or a state can do to a soldier. And of course, this type of work, or if it's not a work because we have an obligatory conscription to army, is inherently dangerous. People are sent to war to be killed or not to be killed, but this risk is clear, and it's nothing secret in this kind of job. But at the same time, the enjoyment of human rights by those soldiers can be also affected by this type of work in a peacetime. And we can assume that cognitive enhancement would usually take place during peacetime. Soldiers are required to make sacrifices and of various kinds. Their life is a bit different of civilians' life. But at the same time, here is the thing I said about the peacetime cognitive enhancement, but it's being argued that soldiers are unlikely to accept the same amount of risk during peacetime as they are accepting during war. And the special characteristics of military life that are especially relevant to this topic is, first of all, military discipline and military hierarchy, in which they work and they have to obey, of course, lawful orders, and they have to work and perform their job according to certain rules of conduct and orders from their superiors. This makes them in a different position than the civilian regular patient. So this also has a twofold conclusion or effect. Soldiers have to prioritize the orders of superiors over their own decisions, and they have to put the public interest, state interest, first before his own private interest. So law of armed conflict is saying nothing, according to my research. Then we have those universal standards, as we all know, Article 7 of Article on Civil and Political Rights, and Article 12 on Civil and Economical, Covenant of Economical and Social and Cultural Rights. And the first one prohibits torture. The second one is setting the standard that is not really a standard that we can claim from state, but it's more a promise of states to do all they can and what they can do actually with the resources that they have to ensure a highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, and to take steps necessary for the prevention, control, and occupational diseases. So I can classify this PTSD and mental disorders as an occupational disease of soldiers. But given the nature of those general provisions, it's very hard to argue that states are obliged to provide this kind of sophisticated and money-consuming, sorry for misspelling here, time-consuming, money-consuming experiments. So state can pursue them, but soldiers are not, they cannot claim those benefits from state based on those universal covenants. Then I'm going to European standards, where we have, and here I have just some general remarks. First of all, no Council of Europe state made a reservation in relation to the two basic rights guaranteed by convention. It's the right to life or prohibition of torture in relation to soldiers. But they made those kind of reservation in relation to other rights guaranteed by the convention. There is no case law of Strasbourg court on internal human rights relations. It means a relation between soldier and state. There is abundant case law on a soldier versus victim of his attack in another country, for example, but not on those internal relations. So it's very hard to get some very analogies, in like a case based on analogy with my argument. But for sure, soldiers are in exclusive control and jurisdiction of a state. So there is applicability of this convention to that kind of relation. And of course, what is the most important is what I said before, that soldiers are in this kind of sensitive situation of possibility of abuse of position of authority of the superior of a state. And when I was looking for some case law that could be somehow similar to this situation, I found that the situation of that kind of soldier is maybe somehow similar to the situation of detainees and prisoners who are also in this kind of control by state. Yeah, and based on that, I came to conclusion that state is obliged to, has a duty to protect life of soldiers from foreseeable danger. So state shouldn't subject soldiers to the experimentation that is known to have some negative effects. It can lead to death. At the same time, this somehow maybe surprising provision is limited in time of war by the purpose, clear and legitimate military purpose, which is not applicable in peacetime, I think. So here we come back to the higher standard than in wartime. And in peacetime, if a state knows that this experiment can finish in death of soldier, he cannot submit this soldier to this one. And if we don't know what are the effects, because we still haven't researched those cognitive enhancement technologies enough, then we have the other standard, which is the standard of medical negligence, which is applied in all type of experimentation and medical procedures. But here there is a recent case of Strasbourg court that was highly criticized, which said that once a state provided and implemented all the highest standard of professional care for patients, the state cannot be held responsible for violation of right to life. So this kind of exonerating premise provides that once we did all according to the art of experimentation, we can follow this experimentation, and at the same time, the state cannot be held responsible. At the same time, the recommendation of Council of Ministers is saying that states should see that sufficient regulations are put in place to protect service persons, soldiers, who could be exposed to the risk inherent to military life. And then we can question what is actually the sufficient regulations. Of course, it's a recommendation, so it's a soft law, a very vague term, very vague terms are used here. But probably I wouldn't go with a higher standard than rational and appropriate measures. And of course, cognitive enhancement is something very advanced. So I conclude that there is no positive obligation to prevent soldiers from being injured during war. But in peacetime, there should be a higher standard. And the Smith case that was heard by UK Supreme Court based on convention was the only probably and the first case where a court decided that soldiers should be ensured with a proper training, proper equipment during peacetime, and if during wartime this training and equipment will fail, and due to that recklessness or negligence, the soldier will die or get injured, then the state can be held accountable. So this is a very controversial case, but this is the only one where actually those internal relations between state and soldiers was analyzed. So then I have a very quick conclusion, because of course protection of right to life is also protection of right to health, and this cognitive enhancement can be treated as a very advanced prevention of mental disorders, and according to recommendations, provided that those professional standards of medical care and human dignity are maintained, and cognitive enhancement that is being administered is not for sure deadly one, then we can consider it as advanced mean of offsetting the causes of risks inherent in the nature of the soldier's work. This is the wording of a recommendation, that's why it's so sophisticated. So in simple words, it can be used as this preventive measure to help soldiers to deal with the mental disorder later on. And finally, I'm going through the Oviedo Convention, which is also the Council of Europe regional regulation, which implements the basic principles of human experimentation, which is protection of the dignity and identity of the human being, respect for the integrity of the individual, primacy of the human being over the exclusive interests of society and science, also public interest of national security of a state, and the two basic conditions, procedural conditions, which I'm describing in my paper, is informed consent before the experimentation, and the proportionality test between risks and benefits of that research. And interestingly, in this convention, there is no exemption clause for armed conflict time or for soldiers. So we can assume that those procedural standards should be applied in peacetime to soldiers during the human enhancement research, let's say. So my three big conclusions from my paper is that there is no provision in international law that would say that states have to administer this kind of enhancement or should, or namely they only can do that because it's not prohibited if the procedural standards are maintained. And it's not determined by human rights. So we have this type of gray zone, let's say, and we have to go to basic principles and general principles, which of course is followed by risk of interpretation. And the second one is that those professional standards, if they are maintained, the cognitive enhancement can be considered as this advanced preventive measure of helping soldiers with mental disorders. And those procedural standards of biomedicine research should be applied in internal relations between state and soldier. And at the same time, soldiers, so patients' autonomy should not be superseded by military necessity or public interest, as it is, for example, provided in American legislation. Still, when I'm talking, there is this kind of provision, but of course, US is outside of European system. And at the end, this all comes to the conclusion that we accept and presume that soldiers can die on the battlefield in the combat, but not in the laboratory. Thank you, and sorry for being 3 minutes over the time. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, so now we move to Ziv for his response. Ziv?
talking to myself, sorry. Hi, Kaja. Hi, and hi, everyone. I'll start with two issues that I truly loved about the paper, and then move to more criticism, because this is why Ido invited me. So I apologize in advance for the ratio.
You're welcome.
The two things that I truly loved about the paper, first of all, you start with this apology saying that it's before proofreading, and by a native speaker, you should not do this kind of apology, because there's something really natural and flowing about your way of writing, and I truly enjoyed it. So I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but you should be aware of it and feel more comfortable with your writing in English. The other issue that I truly loved, I'll in a moment make a qualification of that, but the issues that you are touching are truly sexy. It's gonna be in the end, after being polished, it's issues that whether you take one direction or the other direction, these directions are dealing with issues that are being discussed, are interesting, are important, and I think that you made the right choice in deciding to write about these subjects. Now moving to the reason Ido invited me, and that's to suggest ways to improve the paper. And I'll do it like that. I'll go through three primary difficulties, and then I'll go over in comments about each section what was the major difficulty in it, and then as much as I'll have time, I'll go to more specific comments. So I'll start with, like, between the three major issues, I'll start with the smallest and move to the medium, and then go to the large. And the smallest out of the biggest is that I think that in the situation today, in present day, it's not even need. I suggest that you should use more the analogy of vaccination. Because first of all, because it's on our minds currently, issues of vaccination and opposition to vaccination, and whether it can be mandatory and so on. Moreover, it's something that I think that if you look, you'll discover that there's much more materials when it comes to soldiers. You noted that in the US they are able to force soldiers to get vaccinated. It's true in Israel, by the way. In Israel, the law allows them to do additional medical treatments and procedures, also because of military reasons, to soldiers without their consent. There are, of course, limitations, but the classical scenario, I cannot see a situation in which a soldier could refuse being vaccinated and be fine with it. And I suspect that in many states it would be the same. So it's an analogy that both would give you things to work with, and something that it would be captivating for the reader in the present day and age. The other thing is, and that relates to it relates differently to the two different parts of the paper. So your presentation of the issue needs to be more balanced. Like, presently, what you're doing is, in part one, given that the treatment is all good, it's only wonderful, it can only help the soldiers and so on. And then when you go to part two, suddenly it's all risk. It's all risky that they will make experiments against the soldiers, and there are health concerns for the soldiers and so on. And the switch is very quick, and it's on page 8. the last sentence on page 8, you're saying that having made this optimistic assumption, however, it is important to underscore other scenarios that have already materialized, and then the whole paper turns completely its tone. So something needs to be more balanced because by page 8, the reader feels that the paper is too one-sided to one direction. And then when you switch sides, first of all, it took me a while to understand it. You've switched sides, and then I said, wait, but how does it relate to part 1? But when you realize that you switch sides, it's difficult to follow the course of the argument. Not to mention that there are other considerations. It's not only it's good for the soldier, but for the issue of medical concerns. First of all, when you raise it a bit here and there, there's the concern that the medical welfare of the soldier would not be the primary aim, but furthering military goals. And also, and I'll get to it when I get to the third issue, there are other people that can be affected. And I'll stress this point. So you are assuming that negative feelings are bad. But there's a negative feeling that is really good for most people in fighting, and that's fear. Fear makes us to be careful about our lives and occasionally about the lives of others. So I'm not certain that fear is only bad. In 2 points. First of all, when we are careful, we protect our own lives. But when we are careful and we are afraid, we sometimes do not take risks that can endanger others. Okay? And I'll get a bit more to it when I get to the third issue. And that issue is that it feels a bit that you started writing one paper and the sources swayed you to the direction of writing a different paper. So you presented a bit differently. You said, I had this paper, but the title is provocative. But I actually feel that it's the title and the first 8 pages that are telling one story, and then the rest of the paper that is telling another story, and I'll try to explain what I'm saying. There is one issue, potential issue for the paper, and that is, let's assume that we have a pill. It's 100% safe, and it causes fear and anxiety to vanish. Is there a duty for a state to give that pill to its soldiers? If that's the subject of the paper, so many of the discussions later regarding experiments are less relevant, but there are discussions that are relevant and do not appear in your paper. For example, if soldiers are fearless, at least according to some researchers, it's and I'm thinking mainly about Grossman, there's a chance that they'll kill more and not less. So it raises all issues of force protection and proportionality and so on that must be raised. Also, and that's also Grossman, their potential, if they are afraid, maybe they'll kill less soldiers and maybe they are less likely to kill themselves. So maybe wars are likely to be less violent. Okay, so there's a series of issues that needs to be discussed, mainly on proportionality and force protection that needs to be addressed, assuming that that's your direction. Assuming that your direction is to say, okay, we have an experimental procedure, when can it be used on soldiers? If that's the case, you need to do a much a much more meticulous work of convincing me that there's something unique about medication about the treatment that reduces anxiety. Because if you go to the entire second part of your paper, there's almost nothing in the discussion that stresses the uniqueness of treatments that reduce anxiety. So what I'm saying that you need to choose which paper you want to write and go with it. The first subject is more sexy, and I think that you started with thinking about writing it, and I think it's more unique. I don't think that that much have been written about it. The other subject, there's a lot to be written about. It's not that everything has been written already about doing experiments on soldiers, but if you are writing a paper on when should experiments be done on soldiers, there's a lot more writing about this subject, and it needs to be put in. And if you want to do it specifically about this kind of medication, you need to justify why you are doing it on that specific kind of medication. Okay, so I'll move from that to my main concern. The main concern that I had with each part of the paper. Some of it would be a bit repetitive, but it's only in order to let you focus on where the issues are found. So as I said, the part one, and I'm referring here now especially to the part before the historical examples. The first part of the paper is too one-sided, and I already explained why. Moving to the historical examples. The choice of examples need to be guided by the subject, by which subject of the two you want to write about. Okay, it wouldn't be the same examples, but in any case, the examples that you chose are not the ones that serve you the best. The Nuremberg example, I can understand why you put it there, because it's the reason for the Nuremberg rules on medical experiments. But that's it. That needs to be a sentence or two after the Nazis, blah blah blah, because it's a whole different ball game dealing with doing experiments on interned individuals and enemy soldier POWs and so on than doing nothing on your own soldiers usually. So the examples needs to be in the range of vaccinations of soldiers, experiments. There are experiments with amphetamines that have been done on soldiers in order for them to stay awake. There are from the original assassins that have used hash in order to be less concerned about the life of others, to present users of LSD and other psycho drugs that are used in various places around the world in wars, in order to make soldiers less afraid, and also, and that links to the point that I already said, it usually makes them less indifferent to the lives of others. So opposite to what you are discovering, you are discussing. The part about the risks that you are putting in the end of, like the third part of part one, the part about the risk is problematic, because you are doing this long list of problems and not actually discussing them. And the weight of the different problems is not the same. There are huge problems, like paragraph 3 is filled with this bucket list of existential concerns, while paragraph 2, the risk of the cohesion of the soldier. As a soldier, I can tell you, boo-hoo. If you didn't get the drug that causes him to be unafraid, boo-hoo for you. Nobody would care that much for that. It's not that this, like I'm exaggerating, but it's both the problem of putting concerns that are not of the same weight and that you are not really discussing any of those concerns. And I'm not saying that you should discuss all of these concerns, because that would turn it into a PhD and not a paper. You need to choose if there are specific concerns that you want to discuss and make them the chapter, and the others either make them disappear or put them in a footnote. There would be always this annoying reviewer when you submit a paper that says, you didn't discuss this concern, and then you put a paragraph putting the specific concerns that bother that annoying reviewer. And you'll all be, or if you haven't been yet, an annoying reviewer at one point or another. So that's about the risk. Then moving on to the law of war part. Ido, I have 6 more minutes, right? Okay. So moving on to the law of war part. There's something really odd for a reader to get to the first normative part and in it discover that you are investing, I don't know, several pages in explaining something that you yourself saying that is not important or not relevant. So if it's not relevant, it doesn't need to be there. If it is relevant, and in a moment I'll say why it's really relevant, it needs to be there, but then it shouldn't be presented as not relevant. Now, I think it should be there, but I think that some of your assumptions make you reach the conclusion that it's not relevant. First of all, you assume that the Geneva Convention 1, does not apply in the relationship between a state and its soldiers. And there's presently a growing camp that argues that Geneva Convention 1 and 2, at least some of its articles, do apply in the relationship between a soldier and a state. And if you look at the articles themselves and compare between different articles, you see that the article about experimentation is arguably one of these articles that a very strong case can be said about it applying in the relationship between soldiers and the state. I think that Dapo Akande wrote everything about it. Moreover, I think that you are saying that the main concern of the law of war is to protect the lives of those not involved. But there are other, I'm always concerned with those that are saying that the aim of the law of war is X. The law of war was made by different people in different times, with different people with different opinions that had made compromises in different times. And therefore it's a mix, a cocktail of different aims and purposes. And even if we go only to the major ones, you have unnecessary suffering, which is the aim of preventing unnecessary suffering does apply to soldiers. And the aim of, and arguably only applies to soldiers if you go only to the treaty articles. And B, you mentioned it yourself, necessity, the St. Petersburg definition of necessity does mean that there is concern for the life of soldiers. But with all honesty, I don't think that that's the main law of war issue that needs to be addressed. I think that the main law of war issue that needs to be addressed is in the scenario of we have in a wonderful period that has no risks, and then we have the issue of force protection and proportionality. Okay, so I'll say like just 2 more short comments and then I'll stop. Regarding human rights, again, the discussion needs to be different if you are choosing one of the subjects or the other. If the subject is, we have this magic pill, so there needs to be a discussion, a more thorough discussion on the applicability of human rights for soldiers in time of battle. All these peacetime experiments and so on can be taken out. If your aim is to do the discussion of experiments, you can go to the whole case law that discuss the rights of soldiers in other aspects and try to make the analogy from there, not only from experiments done on prisoners. but there is case law that dealt with the extent of that human rights apply to soldiers in other contexts, and you can draw analogy from there. But again, it depends on the direction that you choose. Lastly, regarding the procedural safeguards, part 5, I'm not certain it needs to be a different part. I think that it can, I know that it's a different convention, but I think that it can be merged with the part of international human rights, and I'll stop here. And thank you again.
Thank you for such a thorough comment and review. Thank you.
Okay, so now we move to the open roundtable discussion part of the session. And if I remember correctly, Magda, you asked the floor first, so go ahead.
Thanks, Ido. Thanks, Kaja, for the paper. I really enjoyed it. I don't know much about the issue, so it was very informative to me. I had 3 initial comments, but one was pretty much taken over, well, almost 1.5 were already listed by Ziv. So the first one is the recent tendency to stretch the protections of Geneva Conventions to cover one's own soldiers. So that's pretty much what that's pretty much included in Ziv's comment. The second one, and that's repetitive, I also seen it in the Q&A panel, to draw more conclusions from COVID vaccines, especially with regards to soldiers. And from my experience, there are 3 main camps. The first one is to simply force vaccines on soldiers, whether or not you want to take it or not. It's pretty much an order, so you cannot refuse. This is an American example. The second camp is to say you don't have to take the vaccine, but you won't go on deployment overseas if you're not vaccinated. So that's kind of, in between. And the third one is just not to touch it, treat soldiers as if they were any other citizens. So I think there is some conclusions, well, maybe not conclusions, but, inspirations to be drawn from as of how states impose vaccines on their own troops. And as for the Gulf syndrome, which is a fascinating story, I need to read more about it, but it's off the top of my head, since you've been looking for case law to draw inspiration from, and I won't be helpful when it comes to international case law, but I do think much could be found in domestic American case law on equal protection clause. So that would be 14th and 15th Amendment. And probably, since I just learned that New Zealand has the same domestic provision, which allows executive to waive the requirement for soldiers of informed consent, maybe something in whatever the adjective is of New Zealand, the Kiwi domestic jurisprudence, you might something there as well, if you decide to go this avenue and look into domestic case law. So yeah, that would be it for me. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for those comments. I will just shortly say that, of course, I have to choose which article I'm gonna write, or both. But when I was just relating to the no case law, I was thinking about European perspective. And since you gave me already those examples of US, Israel, New Zealand, maybe I will consider to write it on general public international law perspective, but given my citizenship and a perspective on Polish armed forces, I was thinking rather about those higher standards of European Convention. And of course, probably vaccination example is such an obvious one I didn't think about, but I just can say that that was my protective clause. I'm trying not to think about pandemic when I don't have to, but sometimes it's very useful. Thank you for those comments. Looking forward for other questions.
Okay, we move with Ivan.
Okay. My question is about cognitive enhancement of the decision-making process at soldiers. So I'm interested, during your research, have you encountered some inside information about which way can be upgraded the decision-making process with cognitive enhancement in soldiers? With trainings or some kind of drugs, or have you encountered that kind of information?
It was rather a general comment, as I said, that there are some specific technologies that are aimed at specific skills, and in decision making on the battlefield, we need some kind of situation awareness, decision making skill itself, and classification of military objectives. That all requires our cognitive skills. And when soldiers are in this kind of extreme situation, sometimes it can be, as it was proved before, by different external factors, it can be impaired and somehow diminished. So then this cognitive enhancement, I'm just talking about general idea, could be improved and protected. It could protect that kind of capability of a soldier. I was reading about different types of experimentation, exactly the amphetamine and other types of drugs that will keep the soldier alerted. And now there are those experimentations on brain stimulation with the electric shocks, etc. That would also make them more aware and awaken after the, I don't know how many hours or days of hardship. So no specific research for the moment.
Okay, great, thank you. And we move with Agatha.
Okay, thank you for this comment and for the for your paper. I actually have three questions. You mentioned the Vienna Convention, and I had the feeling that you referred to the Vienna Convention and the equal level and treated equally as the law of the armed conflicts and human rights law regimes, as you were enlisting it in the same row. And the Vienna Convention has only 29 ratifications. So my question is, do you treat the Vienna Convention as part of the customary law if you enlisted as equal to the law of armed conflict and the human rights law, or what is your opinion on the binding force of the convention or the norms that are included in the Vienna Convention? And my second question refers to the many references you made to the different standards that European standards, for instance, these recommendations of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, European Convention of Human Rights, this case law of the European Court of Human Rights. So I was wondering whether you checked if the European states apply any of the standards mentioned, especially in the recommendation of the Committee of Ministers, but also deriving from the Convention on Human Rights in their application of cognitive enhancement procedures. If you mentioned them in this context, because you mentioned mainly the example of United States. So did you check that if any of the European states made use of the recommendation of any other standards from the convention? And also, I have one question for a small clarification, because on page 7 of your paper, you mentioned that there's a link between emotions and the law of armed conflict. And it was a little bit unclear for me, so I wanted to ask whether how do you see this link? Do you think that did you find any norms of international humanitarian law of the armed conflict that refer to emotions somehow directly or indirectly? Could you elaborate anyhow on that? Thank you.
Thank you for those thorough questions. So first of all, of course, I don't treat Oviedo and the European Convention and the whole body of law of armed conflict as the same type of norms, given the fact that one are universal, the other are regional, and the mere convention is at 29. I think protocol is ratified only by 19 or 22, so even less. And for example, our country is not party to those conventions. So of course, I don't treat them as being the same type of norms. But of course, this relates to the second question. Thank you for pointing that out, that I was treating the European law, but giving the examples of American law. And that's also something I have to work on. I didn't find any information on cognitive enhancement procedures in national European regulations. I will try to look for it. And the third one was about the emotions. So literally, I didn't find any provisions on emotions, but I think this is my some kind of intuition that they are somehow involved with moral implications for a law of armed conflict. So those provisions that relate to some common sense, like this Martin's clause, and some general principles. Principle of humanity itself is something that is humanity an emotion or an ethical concept or legal concept? We don't know. And that's why I was saying that if someone has read something on emotions and war, unfortunately, I found only one Brazilian article, which was in Portuguese, so I couldn't really read it, and I was afraid to Google Translate it. But I don't think that emotions are in legal provisions. They are rather those motivations and factors that led people to take those provisions and change them into the text or customary law. So yeah, also answering Oviedo, for sure not customary law, but I think that's those proportionality principle and informed consent, they can form part of customary rules because they are also stemming from covenants and practice, maybe with some exceptions to soldiers, as I know now. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Perfect. We move now with Fabiano.
Hi, Kaja. No, thank you for the paper. And I have actually a lot of comments, and they all come from somebody who's not a lawyer or has any experience with it. So take them as that. I probably won't be able to do all the comments I wrote down about your paper, but I can send you an email about them. So from the narrow and short literature review I did on enhancement in war, which does include some amount of papers, but definitely not all. Many high-stakes professions already make widespread use of cognitive enhancements, and enhancement in war, a lot of them would fall into that category. And although the law largely lags behind that, they have some moderate degree of acceptance already. So, for example, doctors, professors, and soldiers already use enhancement. And in doctors and academics, the prevalence is 1 in 10. Or was, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago. It's probably higher now. And in the case of soldiers, I never found any statistics. I also didn't look for any updated ones, so that's something you might want to do. But it seems to me several of those cognitive enhancements are already in widespread use, at least in the US military. So many of the first studies of cognitive enhancement were actually from the US Air Force, including amphetamines, modafinil, and memory enhancements for older pilots. And this is from 30, 20 years ago. I would expect the list is a lot longer now, or maybe I'm deeply wrong and this is actually banned now. I don't know. But it's also the case that many US soldiers already use over-the-counter stimulants such as caffeine. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's something to prevent emotional trauma is already used sometimes. We have things like propranolol that it's very crude, but maybe there is something better. I don't know. And as yesterday's other presentation indicates, enhanced pilots are very likely already departing EU soil to fight in wars. So this is very relevant for European actual war law, let's say, regardless of what is written in a law. If the US is making widespread use of it, then this is already happening in European soil. I don't know, these things, again, this is coming from somebody who's not a lawyer, who is more looking at maybe what should happen and what is happening and not so much what the law is. It seems weird to have a lot of legal discussion about this without conceding this is already happening, and that the kind of things we ask soldiers to do would be impossible without enhancement. So, for example, very long flights. Sometimes the pilots have to fly from the US to the Middle East. The refuel, it would be impossible for a normal human being to do that. And one might even go back further in time. I mean, this is stretching things a bit, but we have the berserkers. That's where the word berserk comes from. And one of the most likely hypotheses that they were using some sort of psychotropic substance. They would literally go berserk. And well, another thing that might also be worth talking more about is the therapy enhancement blurry distinction, which is definitely a real issue, even though there is a distinction, but it's not that clear sometimes. And things like, for example, bulletproof vests can be considered a kind of human enhancement in a certain light. It's not normal human behavior to be able to take a bullet to the chest and survive. So it is an enhancement. Of course, this is not what a lot of people think about, and we have more extreme cases of enhancement of technologies that are still to be implemented. But in a way, it seems like a bulletproof vest is a kind of enhancement. And I think all of this actually makes your case a lot stronger, because this is something that is already happening. So it's not like, oh, we are trying to figure out what's going to be the law in the future, but like, it's we already, in a way, we decided we are using it, and the law needs to upgrade, at least in the US, and I would expect UK Air Force also makes use of it. And another comment is that, at least for philosopher and friends, audience, you take care about the definitions. So it's not exactly clear how you define human enhancement. You kind of make, there's like a sort of ambiguous sentence there in the beginning that almost make it seem that you are saying it's a subset of human-machine merger, which I think it's not what you mean. I think this is on the first or second paragraph of the paper. And cognitive enhancement is often taken as a more narrow enhancement directed at concentration, attention, short-term memory, etc. And it seems like some of the kinds of enhancement that you defend would fall within either emotional, mood, or memory enhancement, not cognitive. And another comment related to Steve's response to your presentation. One interesting thing you might want to look at is that, as I vaguely remember from when I took neuroscience in college, I think there are two kinds of fear, paralyzing fear and active. And active might include defense. It's not necessarily that you are attacking. And there's also two kinds of stress. There's a short-term reaction, and there's a long-term chronic stress. And as I remember, active short-term fear or stress doesn't have nearly as many bad side effects as a paralyzing and long-term. So perhaps if the soldier is able to have that burst of fear and react and do the proper thing, which again doesn't necessarily mean he's going to attack the enemy, it would be a good thing. But if in the end he doesn't retain that stress for life and after duty, that will also be a good thing. And I would expect also that he wouldn't need to take the enhancement throughout his life. You talked about out of duty, but if as long as he doesn't register that kind of emotional stress in his memory, even though he goes through it, you would likely, I think, reduce things like PTSD. Of course, we are very far away from developing those things, I think. Although I wouldn't be surprised again if somebody is using it. And well, I have some other sparse comments I will send you over email. And thank you again for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you for exactly those were the comments I was expecting from non-lawyers, especially those about the classification of cognitive enhancement, because of course I'm aware I could mix here some notions. I think that the one point when you related to the first paragraph on human-machine merger, so did I understand it correctly that human-machine merger cannot be a part of cognitive enhancement if it would involve implementation, installation of some kind of device in a brain?
Yeah, it could be part of enhancement. It's just that those things overlap. But I think if you put it on the definition, it makes it. I'm not saying that's what you meant or even what I read from it. I'm just saying that sometimes it gets a little bit confused. And those are the kinds of things that tend to annoy philosophers, which is in itself very annoying about philosophers. I agree, but
vicious circle. I understand. Okay, so I'm looking forward to your email. Please write me the I don't know, the names or the words I could look for. I noted those: fear, paralyzing, active, etc. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's my turn. I will have a simple question again. It is not really clear for me what cognitive enhancement is. Is it a measurement pro futuro, so for the future, or is it a measurement retroactively? So it's not clear for me whether cognitive enhancement is clearly for the purpose of treating post-traumatic stress disorder, for instance, because in that way it is a retroactive measurement. And in this case, I don't really see the point why international humanitarian law is present in the discussion. And I don't really understand why military necessity is a legal basis for this intervention. Because if I see where this means that if the soldier is no longer in the battlefield and he returns to home, for instance, then the state maybe is obliged to provide some kind of cognitive enhancement treatment, like neurosurgic intervention to the memory. In that case, I don't really see why international humanitarian law applies. But if the treatment is a pro futuro treatment, so it is to enhance the cognitive abilities of the soldiers to perform better in the battlefield, then it's a completely different issue. And I think that it is not really clear from the paper or from the presentation whether it is for the military performance of the soldiers or it is really to treat post-traumatic stress disorder for the soldiers.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, military necessity notion is in my article repeated several times, and sometimes it's a citation or a use of the same term as is being used by international organs or a national regulation. And what I find, it's a different military necessity than we understand it in a law of armed conflict. And so it's more like this kind of public interest or national security necessity, and then just it's framed in the term of military necessity. And when it comes to the mere definition of the cognitive enhancement I gave in my paper and presentation, I will have to change it if it's not clear, but I think several times I was repeating that it should be treated as a preventive technology or a measure, so to prevent those kind of long-term consequences. That's why I was giving those examples of I'm so sorry, I have sun in Krakow now, preventive measure to help soldiers to get rid of those mental disorders that are usually appearing after the service or after the deployment for a specific mission. And what I understood from the logic is that the source of that kind of mental disorder is during battle, during combat. So we have to act before someone is deployed to stop, to prevent the body or the brain from getting those external factors inside, to leave this stress, and then to help the soldier, like not help after battlefield, but this preventive measure should stop him from getting sick afterwards. That was at least my logic, how I understood that, to shield him from those negative effects of his service. Is it still not clear? I see you're not convinced.
That was my question, because it was not really clear for me whether it is just for the pure interest of the soldiers, or is
that's my perspective in this article.
Functions.
That's my perspective, not the state perspective, not the war perspective, but the perspective of soldier. Can he be forced as a human being?
And just one more question. Do you think that this cognitive enhancement may only be applied with advanced technology like neuroscience or electric stimulations to the brain? Or do you think that, for instance, a normal psychology therapy, preventive psychology therapy could be of use as well? And can you regard it as a cognitive enhancement?
Well, probably the definition, we don't have legal definition of cognitive enhancement, so everyone can have his own definition for the sake of legal analysis, I think. But again, I'm not sure whether preventive therapy exists. Whether we in one part I was citing that that those therapies could be coupled with that additional, and I think advanced technology that would be something more a substance, or this physical integration of, I don't know, physical flow of electric shock, or something that is being merged with human flesh and body.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we move with paper one.
Thank you, Kaja, for the talk. I really enjoyed it. And I think I have like 3 suggestions. The first one is that, because I haven't got a chance to read your paper, so it's all based on today's talk. The first one is that it seems to me that there are 3 issues you were talking about in this paper. The one is the ethics of experimenting cognitive enhancement. And the second is providing cognitive enhancement. And the third is mandatory cognitive enhancement. I think these 3 topics are all very different, and the ethical issues they are going to touch on will be also very different. So I guess if we are going to stick with the duty to prevent disease, I guess perhaps it will be more interesting in focusing on providing cognitive enhancement and making it mandatory. Because if it's providing, that it's kind of like providing healthcare, and then the soldiers still have the autonomy to decide whether or not they want to take the enhancement. And it will be very, very different from like making it mandatory. And the second one is that I was thinking that perhaps you can also engage with some literature on treating PTSD, because I feel that actually the thing you care the most is the mental health. And it is there is a drug called citalopram. It is a kind of a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor again. It's used for treating PTSD already. So perhaps you can Google that up a little bit to see if you can make a case here. And the final one is that I think some other people has mentioned, that is that some of the cases you are talking about here are not really like cognitive enhancement, but affective enhancement, because you are focusing on reducing fear and maybe also anxiety. So in the field of human enhancement, we usually say that this kind of enhancement will be affective enhancement because you are tackling the affective faculty, not really like purely cognitive. So I can send you some paper on that. But the interesting bit here is that in philosophy and also in recent study in neurosciences, people notice that emotion is very, very important in guiding our action. So when you are talking about like preventing fear, preventing anxiety, then somehow the soldier might lose the situational awareness, like the reason that they feel like I'm really, really anxious here. Perhaps that means that they don't completely agree agree with their superior, like the older has some problem, and then I don't really know international law, world law, I mean, but in bioethics, there's a very huge debate on conscientious objection. So like a medical doctor may object to do something based on their conscience. And I remember I heard someone telling me that in Israeli troops, the soldier may reject certain order from their superior if they find it deeply immoral, because the history of Nazi. So people say that it is very, very important for the soldier to have the right and power to make the decision that really, really
unfortunately is only unlawful. Unfortunately, I'm just saying for the bioethics debate in law, it's only unlawful order that can be rejected, and it's also very problematic how to find it unlawful. And
because
sorry, I just wanted to
it's fine. It's just that because in the effective moral enhancement debate, people would argue that if you intervene a person's affective faculty with pharmaceuticals, then you somehow paralyze their rational faculty or other things. You just dictate their moral emotion and their moral response to a certain environment. Then they feel like then you are just making people into a puppet. They don't have the agency. But then I guess in the military context, it will also be a little bit different, because like what you say, a soldier in a war context is also a kind of weapon. So I guess there will be some interesting philosophical discussion happening here.
Thank you. I noted affective moral enhancement. We'll look for that, and if you happen to have some kind of articles that are talking about that, and they are good one, because it's also hard to find in another discipline something that is relevant. And just commenting on your last point, those puppets, it's not only my opinion, but once several years ago, I found myself at the conference with big names of law of armed conflict, and they were discussing lethal autonomous weapon systems, and we were discussing the notions of autonomy, so something like moral agency. And they said that, well, we are thinking about replacing soldiers' autonomy with machine autonomy, but in fact, there is not much difference. And that was, of course, ironic of them, but I think that there is this kind of assumption that soldiers are deprived of their autonomy in some extent. So, puppet would be probably not an official name or notion, or I would never put that in any article, but their agency is limited by law. Thank you for the comments.
I think now it's my turn. So let me try to do it in order. Yeah, okay. So I think I have 3 little comments / questions. Let's not put a title on it. One is that I like the idea. I think Ziv is right that once you choose where you take it or you split it in whatever way, it's going to be very refreshing and interesting. And if you title it the right way, it's going to get published really, really quickly, actually, because everyone is looking right now to the relevant title related somehow to medical stuff. And it goes stronger and stronger the more we are still in COVID context. You relied a lot about the right to life in the context, but you don't refer at all to General Comment 36 by the Human Rights Committee, which addresses the right to life. Now, they have some aspects on medical stuff. They relate to IHL a little bit. I'm
sorry, which comment? General 36. Comment to Article 7.
General Comment 36 on Article 6.
Article
on
6.
The right to life. It's from 2 years ago, pretty much.
Okay.
And the Human Rights Committee. And you should look at it because they have taken some aspects a little bit further than they used to be. It wasn't as mainstream as some might have wanted them to be. And it might be useful for you, but at least you have to refer to it because it's a main source right now. Another thing is in the context of the interplay between IHL and IHRL, IHL and the human rights. I think Zino referred to it a little bit, but either we are treated them in the context of SMIT, for that matter, before deployment, and then I'm not sure IHL is relevant to that sense. I told them that it's pure IHRL. But even within the armed conflict, although Ziv is right, as always, I will always say Ziv is right, and IHL refers a little bit, to some extent, to armed combatants, there is not much about armed combatants within IHL, and therefore we complete it. There is no controversy between IHL and IHRL. When there is nothing, IHL says nothing. So we go to IHRL, and there is relevancy and there is importance to the right to life and the question of unnecessary inhumane treatment maybe and unnecessary suffering and all that. So yeah, there is more room to address the whole question of IHRL in both sides of the deployment, before the deployment and during the deployment, and of course after the deployment. So you have 3 time spans, and how do you include all these 3 time spans within? I think I might have wanted to see more of that. And in the context of state versus its own combatants, you do have some international criminal aspects. In the Netaganta case of the ICC and in the ECCC in Cambodia, they referred to mainly crimes against humanity against your own combatants or your own forces. And if you go and argue that some of the treatment is illegitimate and you can prove that it's widespread and systematic, maybe you can take that step as well towards the enhancement treatment if it's a bad enhancement treatment. And it goes back to the comments that some of it might be good and some of it might be bad. And then it's important to provide it in a holistic view, the entire discussion. Yeah, that's it. One small comment about the last reply that we talked about the illegal order that you can refuse to. It actually has to be manifestly illegal. Just an illegal order you have to obey. If it's just illegal, you have to follow it. And then, at least according to the IDF in Israel, usually you would have to follow. Ziv, don't shake your hand. But if it's manifestly illegal, if it's bluntly illegal, it's clearly illegal, then you might have the legitimacy to say no. But you might have to be punished for that just as well. That's it.
Thank you for pointing out for this to this general comment. I will look for that. I'm not sure whether I understood your comment on this interplay between LOAC and human rights. What was the, because I understood how it works before war, during armed conflict, and afterwards, but your comment was that it was not clear whether why I'm citing IHL and human rights.
You are citing IHL, but I think it should be clearer that the responsibility of the states towards its agents, the combatants are agents of the states, and I think you referred to it in your paper. But because they are agents of the states, they are still bound by international human rights law, and as long as IHL doesn't contradict it and we don't have the lex specialis discussion at all, then it is basically fully applicable within the concept, of Smith's say in other cases in the UK especially. They say that there are specific risks and there are certain risks, and you refer to that as well in your paper with the European Commission recommendation on that there are unique risks to that occupation, to that position, but still human rights is fully applicable within that framework.
Thank you so much. After all those comments, I have, I think, 5 papers of notes after this round of discussion, and I can write my PhD again on that, I guess. So many topics before, during, and after deployment. But I'm joking, but it's always a very hard work now to decide where to go, and when everything is so interesting. But I'm very grateful for all the comments and questions and all the recommendations in the chat. So I will try to go back to all the answers in a free time.
Okay, so I want to thank Kaja. I want to thank Ziv for your participation in this panel. Kaja, it was a very interesting presentation, and I think you received a couple of notes that will help you to improve the paper, which is the goal of this workshop. Ziv, thank you very much for the comments, and now we're going to take approximately 50 minutes break, and we start at the next round hour or whatever you are with the next presentation by Ilan.